Man, I used to love Stranger Things. I vividly remember the way I felt watching that first season all the way back in high school, staying up into the wee small hours of the morning to religiously binge its episodes since I knew my mom would never approve. Stranger Things at the time, like the streaming service that produced it, was weird and new and wistful, and it felt like it was deploying its weirdness and newness and wistfulness in service of a really sweet little story. Its themes of a small town rallying together in the wake of an unthinkable tragedy to stand against the increasing encroachment of a malevolent federal government were timely, and the darkness of its tone seemed all the more striking when juxtaposed with the warmth of its immediately lovable cast. It was like watching three different versions of the same narrative unraveling all at once. The kids of the party were living out one of those supernatural 80s classics with their cool new superhero friend. The teens were in this gritty high school coming-of-age story of supernatural horror, and the adults were in a full-blown character-driven drama underpinned by Joyce and Hopper's warring personalities and respective traumas. It was brilliant. But best of all, everyone seemed to love it as much as I did. Nowadays, our collective culture is fraying at the seams, everyone isolated in their own echo chambers. It's so rare for everyone you know to be on the same page and watching the same thing at the same time, but Stranger Things was that thing. Everyone was talking about it. This show felt like a tentative first step into a mature new world, and we couldn't wait to watch the show grow up along with us. It's been a decade since then, and with the series having finally, mercifully come to a close, in writing a eulogy for a show that used to mean something to me, I have to ask myself an uncomfortable question. What happened to Stranger Things? Well, today, I want to answer that question, or at the very least, I want to try. I want to take a look back at the finale of Stranger Things, the very specific way its fanbase reacted, and the theories it spawned in its wake. And hopefully, in doing so, we can learn a little bit more about the way our relationship with television and cinema as an art form has changed over time, and the way our insistence that works of fiction conform to our expectations is gradually eroding art itself and our perception of reality. So, without further ado, this is... If you've spent any time at all online in the new year, especially on TikTok or the stranger side of Twitter, you've probably heard of Conformity Gate. I don't even need to outline the tenets and tentpoles of the theory, you've all seen the edits. It's conveniently packaged, it's even more convenient to believe. Essentially, the final episode of Stranger Things was such a monumentally dissatisfying disappointment that the internet collectively decided to revive the secret good episode of Sherlock theory one more time, for Auld Lang Syne or whatever. The idea was that the entirety of Volume 2 of Season 5 had been an illusion constructed by Vecna to lull the audience into a false sense of security and believe that he had been defeated. An illusion that would be ruptured by the release of a secret, real, actual factual series finale releasing the following week on the 7th of January. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems like a mighty audacious claim to make. What could possibly be the evidence for such an assertion, you might ask? Well, you see, all the way back in Season 1, Will rolled a 7 during the opening game of Dungeons & Dragons, and that meant the Demogorgon actually got him, and that sort of reminds me of January 7th. And in Season 4, when the gang was playing Dungeons & Dragons again to tee up another big bad like they did the first time, apparently Eddie claimed that Vecna was only thought to be dead. So clearly that must be foreshadowing too, since there's no way the Duffers have been making all of this up as they go, since there has to be some sort of grand design that justifies the amount of time and energy I've invested in this. And hey, have you seen that the Hawkins High graduation robes are all orange when the school colors are green and yellow? That's kinda weird, right? And look at all those extras buzzing the camera in the background. They must be agents of Vecna, and not just improperly directed background actors. And have you heard about the dial? Have you heard about the dial? It's a different color now, like the merry-go-round. It's all connected. Oh, it's all coming together now. In case it wasn't already clear, I think the whole conformity gate theory itself is pretty silly. Setting aside the obvious logistical hurdles it would have needed to clear, it just didn't make sense in the context of all 5 seasons of the show and the storytelling sensibilities the brothers Duffer had so clearly demonstrated up to that point. And even if it was real, it wouldn't even have been good. Congratulations, you made all of Volume 2 a bad, boring, muddled mess with murky mischaracterizations. Just because the secret episode revealed it was all a dream, that doesn't absolve you of the sins of making a bad season of television. Far from it, actually. Why would you simply not make the show good the first time? And if the theory itself is ridiculous, you can imagine how I feel about the fact that Conformity Gate truthers literally crashed Netflix's servers the day their holy grail was supposed to be delivered unto them. But you know what the worst part about the fans that fan the flames of Conformity Gate is? I can't even blame them. Oh, don't get me wrong, I still think these theories were founded on specious reasoning, and the people who worked themselves into a shoot by believing in them are losing at chess to a dog on 3 separate boards concurrently. But I can't even blame the conspiracy theorists and their ridiculous cope takes for reacting to the show in the way that they did, because this is the way the show itself, and the studio that produced it, has historically conditioned them to engage with art. In order to understand the socio-cultural forces that gave rise to a community groundswell like Conformity Gate, we're going to have to go back a ways. So, if you'll forgive me for the boring and cumbersome history lesson, I'd like to very briefly cover the predecessors of Conformity Gate, all the past cases of fans campaigning to see the true ending they themselves envisioned, and it all starts with these two, Ridley Scott and George Lucas. These two filmmakers, whose works serve as the foundation for so much of our culture's collective nostalgia, are themselves the guys who wound up indirectly contributing to the fall of the biggest, dumbest nostalgia circle jerk of our lifetimes. In terms of the fetishization of the real ending in the modern entertainment landscape, you can argue that it all starts with these two in the creation of the director's cut, or the special edition. I love Blade Runner, and I love Star Wars, I really do, but this is where the sickness starts. All artistic mediums have a curious relationship with commercialism, but I'd argue that this mercenary industrial mindset is most deeply intertwined in the motion pictures and television. But therein lies the rub. You give the reset button to the artists, and it goes to the studios, too, by design. It's inherent. The Overton window was already opened, it was already too late. Film and television set a completely novel standard for themselves as an art form, making motion pictures the only medium where the finished work is not immutable upon being delivered to the masses. Can a motion picture really still belong to its artists when they surrender their art as a finished work for public perception? Does a movie just belong to a single director or an actor when a motion picture is the product of an entire village of different creatives and collaborators all working together in concert? But in the end, none of those questions even mattered. We decided we simply didn't care enough to answer them. In these visual arts so closely interlinked, the story never needs to end. Nostalgia can be churned out and regenerated forever. You can just keep on fiddling, polishing off all the smooth edges and peculiarities and texture that made your art what it was. This is the philosophy of the 80s. This is where the philosophy of Stranger Things comes from. And this will eventually become the defining issue with the arts in the 21st century, too, as art is gradually replaced with the word content, or media, two terms I utterly abhor, by the way. Nothing better exemplifies the flattening of our human experience with the works of art we behold. In this age of the internet, armchair film critics were on the rise. Our criticism became increasingly granular, exponentially more particular and pedantic. Your Pauline Kaels of yesteryear, the real film critics of a bygone age, they at least had to possess a knowledge of the history of their art form and discipline to treat it critically and carefully. They possessed a fidelity of tradition that gave their perspective toothsomeness, nuance, but now everyone could be a critic. And everyone was. More specifically, everyone was cinema sins. The myriad millions of little mistakes that weave together to compose a film's background were suddenly the only thing that mattered to the viewing public. This became the criteria by which motion pictures were judged. They became things we graded, not art that we experienced. Benjamin predicted this, you know. I hate to say it, I really do. I think his view of cinema and television is far too cynical, but in that famous piece on mechanical reproduction, he so saliently argued that when viewing a moving image, the audience is permitted to, quote, take the position of a critic without experiencing any personal contact with the actor. The audience's identification with the actor is really an identification with the camera. This position requires no attention. The public is an examiner, but an absent-minded one. It's almost uncannily prescient, the phenomenon he's describing here. He's writing about the second screen viewer before screens ever even invaded our homes. It's like someone swept him up in a time machine and took him back to see the series finale of Stranger Things. Fast forward to current year, and nowadays the collective hive mind of fandom has learned all the wrong lessons from the director's cut and the special edition. The precedent has been set that if they pitch a fit, they can force the hand of studios and filmmakers into giving them the version of reality they really want. Was Zack Snyder's Justice League really the movie its director set out to make all along, when so much of that film is composed of completely new material filmed exclusively for its release? I think the better question is, does it really matter? Before, it was just directors and studios that had the power to protest, rewind, and revise their films even after release, but Snydergate decided to open the floodgates to the public at large, too. We think we're entitled to that sort of fan service now. And why shouldn't we? At every turn, the modern entertainment landscape rewarded and engendered this mindset, incentivized the binge eating and constant consumption of art like fast food. We are a nation of casual armchair critics, mobilized not by our love of the art, but purely by our sentiment of distaste. Why should we treat art any differently? Why should we not demand our satisfaction? And all of these different, disparate issues, the legitimacy of director's cuts, the increasingly shallow superficialities of criticism, and the evolving nature of fandom relationships with the art and entertainment they claim to enjoy, all of these causes culminate in the ultimate modern modicum of everything that is wrong and broken with the motion picture arts of cinema and television. All of these things, collectively, were the causes of Conformity Gate. And with all this context and history now at our disposal, now that we understand where the mindset that created Conformity Gate truthers came from, we can see that there's a much bigger, infinitely more obvious problem with these sorts of fix-it fan theories. I want to ask you all a question, and I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. When has this sort of storytelling ever been Stranger Things' thing? And I'm not just talking about the hidden lore foreshadowing type metatextual ARG that would have needed to be taking place across the entirety of the second volume of the 5th season for Conformity Gate to have been true, for which there was no actual precedent within the text of the show itself, by the way. I mean, when has this simple act of taking risks in its storytelling been a thing that Stranger Things does? If you want to get really philosophical about the problems with this show, you have to go all the way back to its first season. Because it all starts with Barb. I wasn't terminally online enough back then like I am now, but the backlash to her death was so ferocious and instantaneous and fierce that I think it fundamentally broke the Duffers as storytellers, more than the divorce ever did. They lost their spine. If this was how people reacted to them killing a one-note but likable enough background character, what would happen if something befell a main member of the cast? Hell, they didn't even have any plans for Steve Harrington, but Joe Keery was just such a likable guy and such a good actor that they kept him around too, and now he was just kind of stuck. So after season 1, and after Barb, Stranger Things started a new tradition. Instead of actually doing anything daring to kill off a character, in their supernatural horror show, mind you, every season they would introduce a brand new character. They would pad their runtime with as many iconic quips and lovable moments and gifable scenes as they possibly could, and then, at the end of the season, they would die. This character archetype, your Barbs, your Bobs, your Alexies, your Eddies, are the show's scapegoats, its sacrificial lambs. They exist to die, to be killed, to be sacrificed on the altar as atonement for the sins of its monumental cowardice. These characters are there to make the show seem as if it has actual stakes, but their deaths are placeholders for all the main cast members its storytellers aren't brave enough to actually do anything with. This is the math of murder by which Stranger Things has always operated. And if this show wasn't brave enough to do anything with its characters under the very safe conventions of the supernatural horror genre, you could pretty safely bet your bottom dollar that it wasn't going to be brave enough to make anything of its small-town queer romance subplot either. It's actually the exact same sickness manifesting with the exact same symptoms. The Duffers just were too terrified of being hated to make any sort of authoritative authorial statement whatsoever. It was clear they had their hearts set on Mike and Eleven from the start, but they also didn't want to alienate the portion of the fandom who convincingly and correctly theorized that Will was gay, so they officially made that canon, and then quickly realized they had absolutely zero idea on how to handle that decision's subsequent implications. Robin's coming out worked in large part because of Maya Hawke's performance and her chops as an actor, and her relationship with Vicky feels so lackluster in Season 5 because she was relegated to the background and couldn't carry the heavy weight of making the entirety of the show's queerness manifest in the text through her monologues. The writing was already on the wall. Byler was never going to get a fair shot, just a token nod. But the popcorn mass consumption mentality of key rattling incentivized by Netflix blinded the show's fan base from realizing that unfortunate fact until it was tragically too late. In what world would a show this cowardly and gun-shy have the courage to attempt an ending as bleak and dark as Conformity Gate? In what world would a show with a philosophy this fragile even survive a finale with some teeth to it? And sure, the real finale is a boring, malformed shell of an ending, but that's nothing new. You've been watching a boring, malformed shell of a show since, like, Season 3. And I thought Season 3 was fun. If you told me that the big, dumb CGI ragdoll fight in the finale was how the show that I fell in love with back in Season 1 ended, I would have laughed in your face. But I bailed off that roller coaster before it was too late, and I calibrated my expectations accordingly. You bought the ticket, you ride the ride. I hate to put too fine a point on it, I really do, but the real Conformity Gate was that desire of the fans, their desire for the show to conform to their preconceived expectations of an ending they simply were never going to get. Maybe those gauche orange graduation gowns are prison jumpsuits, but these characters aren't Vecna's prisoners. They're the prisoners of their creators, who were incapable of telling their stories with dignity and courage, and the prisoners of their audience, who only ever wanted to play with them like dolls. Time and time again, Stranger Things has failed. It failed to deliver on its promise of an alien, inhuman evil, so they had to pivot, forced to make that evil incarnate time and time again. First through weird slug possession, then the Mind Flayer's inhabited consciousness inside Billy, and then through Vecna. Stranger Things tried to at least make this more mundane version of evil a compelling antagonist by portraying Vecna's backstory as a sort of thematic inverted mirror to Will's arc, but at the last minute, it shies away from the most salient of those similarities and sidelined them to a stage play in exchange for something much more ham-fisted. And don't even get me started on how in Season 1, Eleven and her fellow experiments were used as psychic weapons in an arms race against the Russians by our federal government, but by Season 3, the Duffers were so profoundly unwilling and ill-equipped to reckon with the evil they were depicting as inherently and quintessentially American that they just inserted the Russians themselves into the picture anyways. There's a big hole in the ground and the world is ending. The status quo has irreversibly shifted and there might actually be consequences for our characters at long last. Slap a big metal plate over that bad boy. We'll be fine. It's fine. Don't even worry about it, dude. You're overthinking it. Time and time again, when offered the chance to make compelling choices, to take big swings and actual risks and raise the stakes, Stranger Things stubbornly and persistently refused. It consistently doubled down to betray its own themes and abandon its own beliefs. This show was never in a million years going to be brave enough to pull a bait and switch like Conformity Gate. It was always too desperate to be loved, too cloying and craven and mathematically engineered for nostalgia and needle drops and vertically optimized cropping for social media in its dying days. The only time when it wasn't afraid to be brave was when it had no choice, when it was almost certainly doomed, when it had to actually be something real to get people to take a chance on a name they didn't recognize. Ever since then, all it's ever chosen to be is Stranger Things. That wasn't always a pejorative. It is now. But man, that first season was something special, huh? Things are never really the same as they were when you were a kid. I guess it's fitting that Stranger Things' failure of a finale wound up reinforcing that last theme one last time, even if only metatextually. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosty.